This conference will now be recorded.
So thanks everybody for joining us for our March webinar in the series. I'm delighted so many people have turned up for it. And in this webinar, Dr. Katia Ferraz, of the professor at the University of Sao Paulo and a member of CPSG, a very active member of our team in Brazil as well, provides an introduction to habitat suitability modeling and its integration into the planning process. Katia has assisted in more than 25 endangered species conservation planning workshops worldwide and has been championing the integration of a predictive spatial modeling tool into the conservation decision-making process. And in this webinar, Katia will provide some examples to illustrate its integration as a means to inspire further use of the tool within species conservation planning. So welcome everybody. Katia, if I leave it for you to give perhaps a fuller introduction, and then you can turn your video off and we'll get started with the presentation, and I will keep an eye on the chat.
Okay, thank you. Good morning for all from Brazil, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for attending this talk, and also thank.
Sorry, Katia, can I just ask everybody to please mute your microphones and just keep them muted for the presentation? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So thank you, Jamie, for hosting me here and for having invited me to join this webinar series. This is something that I really enjoy, I really like, and I intend to share with you my experience working in the last 11 years for conservation planning. So I will talk about the use of spatial models. I'm listening myself. So let's try again. So I will talk about the use of spatial models for species conservation planning. And in the last 11 years, I have been involved in so many conservation workshops, and I have worked very closely with many conservation teams and institutions, trying to engage them in the effective use of spatial models in conservation planning. So today I will talk a little bit about the modeling tool, and then I will give you some examples and tell you how we were able to make this tool so effective, so useful. So I will just close my, oops, wrong button. Sorry, Jamie, can you just...
That's right, no problem. Yeah, I'll just find you in the list again and I'll make you presenter.
Sorry.
That's right. Okay. I'm actually going to make you the, I'm going to make you the
invitation for sharing screen again, please.
I'm going to send you, because it doesn't seem, I'm just trying to get rid of you as presenter, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make you, I'm going to have to make you organizer just now.
Sorry for my mistake. I just pressed the wrong button.
That's all right. So you should get something now.
I'm not familiar with the buttons here.
That's right. You should get something now that allows you to share your screen. Can you do that?
I can't see the invitation to share this screen. So
can you see on the bottom of your screen now?
Okay.
Can you see a screen button?
Yes. Now I got it.
If
yeah.
Use that then.
Yeah. Sorry. So let's go. So I will talk about the modeling tool I have used in the conservation planning workshops. So the tool is the species distribution modeling, so the SDM. The SDM is a powerful, well-known, commonly used tool. And I'm pretty sure that most of you already have listened or used the SDM. And there are thousands and thousands of scientific papers published in the last 2 decades, mostly related to ecology, biogeography, and conservation. So the SDM is a correlative approach that relates the GPS location, so the presence points of a species, and the spatial variables related to the species distribution or species niches. So presence points and predictors are included in different algorithms. So there are lots of algorithms to run species distribution models. And one of the most common used algorithm is Maxent. And Maxent is also the algorithm that I have using in my mostly modeling exercise. So it is possible by modeling to have these two products at least. So the first map is a binary map called the potential distribution. So this map shows us where the species is present here, represented by the gray area, and where this species is expected not to occur, represented by no color area. And also, it's possible to have this map called the suitability model that shows you suitability or probability of species presence in the suitable area. So these two model results, when used by different stakeholders, so conservationists, species experts, decision makers, can guide decisions and setting priorities for the species conservation. So the SDM has been used as part of the planning cycles for endangered species conservation planning, mainly by two conservation institutions. So the Conservation Planning Specialist Group from the IUCN, Species Survival Commission, has used the SDM as part of the planning cycle inside a workshop process called Population Habitat Viability Assessment, the PHVAs. And the Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, a federal agency in Brazil linked to the Environment Ministry, has also used the SDM as part of his planning cycle in the workshopping process called National Action Plans, NAPs. So each institution carries on its own planning cycle, but both the PHVA and the NAP are workshop process developed to assist each species in the red list from IUCN or from the national lists, as in Brazil, for example, to have a plan. And both processes make uses of facilitation tools for engaging stakeholders, fostering a learning participatory environment by listing actions and recommendations for species conservation. So these workshops can make use of modeling tools such as the PVA, for example, the population viability analysis, a very common used tool by the CPSG, and the species distribution modeling. And both modeling tools help to predict the current and future status of the species. So all these model results are part of the plan, and the modeling results are used to guide action and decisions for species conservation. I'm sorry, I think there are some microphones open. So if it's possible just to keep them muted, I think it will help it. Thank you. And what does make the spatial models useful and effective for conservation planning? And the answer for this question is not related to this exceptional tool or only related to the marvelous model results, but it is more related to the way models are built and used by the stakeholders committed to the species conservation. So it's evident for us that deliver scientific papers with good results about modeling distribution, about the SDM and conservation, does not bridge the gap between science and practice, does not assure the effective use of the SDM as conservation tool, does not improve the species conservation decision making. So what should we do to make this tool useful and effective for conservation? So recently we published this paper in last December that describes a participatory modeling process that makes use of the SDM, the modeling tool, to bridging the gap between researchers, conservation planners, and decision makers to improve species conservation decision making. So this process was developed in the last 11 years in all the conservation workshops I have participated. And the process, the PMP SDM, have assisted more than 25 endangered species along these years. And the process allowed us to make an effective use of the SDM guiding conservation decisions, as I will show you in the next examples. Also helped to bridge the gap, as I mentioned, and also leverage the formation of an alliance for species conservation based on collaboration, engagement, long-term commitment, and trust-building relationships. So the PMP SDM focuses on stakeholder engagement and commitment to co-develop SDMs that will in turn support and guide conservation decisions. So the process allows us to foster a learning environment, allowing knowledge transfer, exchange, and mutual learning. So after this, it's possible to work on knowledge co-production. So we work to engage all the participants in the conservation workshops in the modeling process. So all the participants, all stakeholders help me to build this model, providing data, information, helping in the model validation, and all the steps of the modeling procedures. And also, by the end, we guide the stakeholders on proper use of modeling results, making the science actionable for all. And so these people not only help the model conceptualization, building, validation, but also they are guided in the model use. So I will not talk, and I will not, my intention today is not to explain the process in detail, but I'm glad to discuss this after, and also you can find all the information in the manuscript. I will focus my talk on give you some examples, so showing some modeling exercises and modeling results that helped us to improve the species conservation. So I will focus on sharing with you examples for 5 different conservation proposals. So the first one is the SDM use for improving species assessment. So the modeling results can help and have helped the species evaluation and risk assessment, especially when model reveals the severe level of fragmentation and habitat loss in suitable area for the endangered species. So as an example, I will show you the SDM that we run for the giant armadillo in Brazil. So giant armadillo is considered a vulnerable species by the IUCN and by the Brazilian red list. And it's a common and endemic species from the Cerrado, Brazilian Cerrado. And the model result just revealed the severe fragmentation of suitable patches for the species, and also revealed us only 4 suitable patches larger than 100 square kilometers for the species. The analysis also showed us a high conversion rate, habitat conversion rate in the last 30 years, around 20%. And both results, the severe level of the fragmentation of the suitable area and the high habitat conversion, helped to keep the species as vulnerable in the Brazilian red list in this species assessment that happened last week. So the model results were essential to guide the decision makers in the decision of keeping the species as vulnerable. So the second purpose is to use the SDM to identify new potential areas for species searching, so to find new populations. And for that, we assume that the probability of the species present is associated to the suitability. So the higher the probability of the species presence, we can find in higher suitable areas. So this information help us to fill in the gap, knowledge, and improving sampling efforts, such as time and money. And so I have 2 examples. The first one is for the red-browed parrot. So Amazonia rhodocurita, it's a vulnerable species in Brazil by the Brazil and the IUCN red list, and it's endemic species from the Atlantic forest. I think there is an open microphone, please, if you could just mute them. Okay, so the SDM was built for this species in the conservation workshop in 2018, and with the engagement of the species experts. And since then, the model has been used for searching new sites and new populations in the field. So please, could you just mute the microphones? There are some microphones open and a lot of noise in the room. So if it's possible, just mute them. Thank you. Thank you. So the SDM helped to find new populations in very highly suitable area for this species. And also the second example comes from this beautiful bird. So the blue-eyed ground dove, it's one of the most critically endangered species. This species is endemic from the Cerrado, and it remains about 27 individuals in only 1 protected areas in Brazilian Cerrado. So in 2019, we ran the SDM for this species using the PMP SDM, the process we developed, and we were able to identify some small suitable cluster of pixels for the species. And right after the workshop, the species experts started to use the model in the field to help species searching. And in 2020, 2 more individuals were found here in highly suitable pixels. So this result also confirmed the effective use of the SDM, improving conservation efforts for the species. So the third purpose is to use the SDM to identify corridors and priority areas for species conservation. So here we also assume that the species presence is associated to the suitable conditions that is related to the higher suitable areas for the species presence. And we also assume that unsuitable areas offer more resistant surface to species dispersal. So based on this, we run the SDM for jaguar in the Caatinga biome in Brazil to identify the priority conservation areas and potential corridors. So the model revealed higher suitable areas here in these polygons, and here the larger patch of the suitable area for jaguar was at that time not protected. And based on the SDM, we also run cost to surface for species movement. We were able to design some suitable corridors linking these suitable patches. And in 2018, the model results helped the creation of this new protected area. So Boqueirão da Onça National Park was designed using the suitability model and also confirming the effective use of the SDM for conservation, for improving species conservation. In another example, just also comes from jaguar. So we run the SDM for jaguar in the Atlantic forest in Brazil. And the model also reviewed the severe fragmentation of the distribution, species distribution, and helped us to find higher suitable areas for species presence. And we developed a framework and associated some data that came from the field, such as the reproductive information, population size, and the model results and also the biological information from the species helped us to define some priority areas, to identify some priority areas for species management and species conservation. So we also identified them by different levels associated, related to different management recommendations. And all these are inserted as part of the National Action Plan for Jaguar in Brazil. So the fourth example is the model we use to predict impacts in the distribution areas. So alterations of the landscape, such as deforestation, can impact the distribution range and the suitability of the area for the species presence. So we incorporated the deforestation rate in the Chaco, especially in this region, for modeling the Chaco and peccary distribution. And this information allowed the update of the suitability for this region, for these species. And the model has been also used by the local government to increase the protection of the species. Another example of this purpose comes from the Brazilian merganser. So the Brazilian merganser is a critically endangered species. It's endemic in South America, and it remains just 3 isolated population in the Brazilian Cerrado, as you can see here, totalizing less than 250 individuals. So we run model, and the SDM just confirmed the fragmentation level of the suitable area for the species. Also indicated some new areas, small areas for new species searching, and this model has been used by the species experts in the field. We don't have any good news by now, but we hope so in the near future. And we use this model to evaluate the impact of the small hydroelectric power plants in the suitable areas for the species. And so the results just reinforce the importance of including the model, the SDM for the species in the environmental assessment studies. So this is one more example of the model used to evaluate impacts over the suitable area. So my last example is the SDM used to provide valuable input for the population viability analysis. So we believe that model results can reduce the uncertainties of some parameters and so some estimates of the PVA. And we have worked together. So Kathy Trailer-Hoster, a CPSG member, and myself, we have worked together to make the integration of the SDM and the PVA possible. So the PVA is one of the most common tools used by the CPSG for conservation planning, and it's used for evaluation of the interaction factors that affects population extinction. And the software used is the Vortex. And the integration we have trying to do is to integrate data from the SDM into the PVA. So I have two examples. So we worked together to model the SDM for Amazon vinacea. So it's endangered species, parrot species in Brazil. It's endemic species of the Atlantic forest. And so we run the model. Based on the model, we were able to identify the resistance of the landscape to species dispersal. Then based on this, we were able to identify 4 patches linked to 4 isolated populations. And this information helped us to estimate the carrying capacity, because the species expert had lots of data about census from the species. So we were able to estimate the carrying capacity based on these populations and information that came from the field. We were also able to infer some parameters about connectivity, and all this information were included in the PVA by Vortex simulation modeling. And all the information that came from both tools, modeling tools, SDM and PVA, helped to fill the knowledge gap and to estimate the extinction for these species for the Atlantic forest. So the second example comes from the Javan leopard. So we run the SDM for these species in the PHVA in 2018, and the model allowed us to identify the larger and good patches for Javan leopard. And based on these and on the information, and also based on the information that came from the field, we were able to identify populations with some information that came about species movement and connectivity. So we named all these 30 isolated population of Javan leopard, and we were able to estimate the carrying capacity for each one, and all this information were included as a parameter, improving the PVA and reducing the uncertainty in the estimatives. And so just to finish, I'd like to point that all these successful results guiding conservation decisions and improving conservation decision making were reached not only by the model results, but by the way models were used by stakeholders. So it is more than modeling. So it's about dealing with people, making use of facilitation skills to promote knowledge exchange and SDM development in an integrative way. And also, it's about guiding the stakeholders in the proper use of the SDM. So working together with all these stakeholders in the conservation planning workshops, we were able to include the SDM results in each plan, each conservation plan. So all these species have actions based by the model results. And we hope many other species can join also of this benefit. And we hope that this could inspire you to try also to make good use of this very powerful tool for improving conservation decision and conservation decision making for the species. So before I end, I would like to thank you, the host organizations, so the organizations that have invited and allowed me to join all these conservation workshops in these last 11 years. So the ICMBio and Parque das Aves in Brazil, and the CPSG and the IUCN. And also I'd like to thank all the conservation teams, institutions and specialist groups that have shared their data and their knowledge with me, and that have helped to build and to select the best model, and also for them by the good use they have doing with the model results. So thank you, and I'm glad to answer questions and to discuss with you. Thank you so much for coming and for paying attention in my talk.
Katia, fantastic. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Really clear and some great examples of the practical applications as well. So I'm just looking in the chat, and there's one from Tim, which is how much work is involved in deciding the predictors, and are there ways of validating these predictors?
Okay, how much effort, right?
Yes, how much work is involved in it? Tim, I don't know if you want to add further. Just see if Tim wants to. Tim, if you want to, you can turn your mic on or add to the chat if you think you could add a clarification.
Can I stop sharing my screen, or do you think it's good to?
Yes. No, I think it's a good idea. So yeah, stop sharing your screen and then we can see more clearly.
Okay, so how
Tim,
much
do you want
effort?
Katia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfectly. Go for it.
Ricardo.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm based in the UK.
nice to find you here. Nice to meet you here.
You. I very much enjoyed your presentation. It's very interesting. I suppose I'm coming at it from a bit of a layman's point of view, really, and I'm thinking that probably the most challenging part is defining a species, its autoecology, really, and somehow, representing that in a reliable way in a computer model that gives us results that are meaningful and hopefully accurate. So yeah, I suppose my question then is and I guess this goes back to your point about stakeholder involvement and getting that sort of expert consensus, does it, in terms of defining those parameters?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And actually, I think the main point of the modeling, the participatory modeling process, is to guarantee the stakeholder engagement. So the process is structured on a way that it starts with a brief explanation about modeling tool, but I never go much in detail because they don't need to know much information about the modeling procedure. but it's essential for them to understand how the model is built and how they can incorporate their inputs into the modeling process. So they started to be involved in the model building, model conceptualization, and then model building, so providing data, and how they helped me with biological information. They helped me to select the relevant functional predictors for the species. Then I run the models, and then I offer them in a plenary menu of models. So different models that I built, considering all the information they provided to me, and also some different combinations of predictors. And then I offer them, I show them the models I have, but I don't provide any specific information about the model. So I don't give them the information about the set of the predictors of each model, because I assume they don't need this to select the best model, because they know the species, they know the environment where the species is supposed to occur. And I prefer they look the model and they compare the model based on their expertise that comes from the field, and looking basically two different aspects. So I asked them to try to find places where this species is supposed to occur, but the model didn't predict. So you know that this is related to the omission error of the model, but I don't tell about anything about omission, about error. I only ask them to answer this question to me and to point these places. And also the second question, I ask them to point the places, the region where this species is not supposed to occur, but the model predicted as suitable or as with some species presence, probability presence. And then as they, these two questions help them to get involved in the process of model selection. The information they provide help me to improve the modeling procedures, to have better models if the models I presented is not enough or is not good, is not considered good. And this helps them to engage in the process of validation. And based on the information, if needed, I run different models, more models. I offer these new models for them until have one model that we consider as best model selected and approved by all by consensus. So I don't stop modeling before having this. And of course, when I offer them models, I only offer good models from the statistical point of view, of course. And this is extremely important because they need to accept that model, and they need to understand that model has some errors. So sometimes this is not the best model that they expect, but this is the best model we can generate based on the information we have by that time. And so when they accept the model, then we start a different phase of we call post-processing. So we started to processing the model that was accepted by all, and run different analysis according to the purpose. So identify priority areas and selecting or designing corridors or generating estimates for the PVA and so on. So the process takes time, takes a lot of energy, takes needs a lot of skills, facilitation skills, and but it worked, and it works, and it worked. I'm not sure if I answered your question. And
yes, wonderfully. Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's other questions. So
yeah, thank you. Just as a curiosity,
thanks, Tim.
Yeah, just as a curiosity, I have some examples that I only two models were enough for the plenary just to say, yes, this second model or the first model was good. And there are some cases like the Czech one Peckery. I run 27 different models until have a best model selected by them. So every process is one process. So.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So Gabby's question is about this interrelationship between SDM and the vortex model, and wondering about how SDM was used to estimate carrying capacity for the vortex model in practice. Are you able to shed any light on that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. This is something that was possible for the two species I showed you, the parrot and the Javan leopard, because the species experts had information about the population size that came from the field, that came from census. So as I am able to identify suitable patches, I can estimate the size of these patches. And if I have the information of population size and also the estimate of the area of this suitable patch, we can estimate carrying capacity. We also need information about the population fluctuation. So if the population is fluctuating at carrying capacity. And if yes, so it's easier to have, we can have a better estimate of carrying capacity. If not, what we do is trying to consider some scenarios, possible scenarios, and then all these possible estimates, optimistic, pessimistic estimates of carrying capacity are included in the scenarios of vortex modeling. I'm not sure if I was clear enough to answer your question, but this is something harder to do when you don't have any information about that comes from the field about the population. So then you should be more careful with the carrying capacity estimates.
Thanks, Katja. Well, I'll have a look in the chat afterwards. And Gabby, if you like to ask a second question to clarify further, then please add that there. There's a question from Hadis on the use of SDM for multiple species of the same genus, like cranes or amphibians. I imagine that's one of the beauties of this. You can look beyond one species, or does that greatly increase the complexity?
Yes, actually, I don't think we can run or make use only one procedure for multiple species, species inside a genus. I think we only can do this if all these species share the same geographic spaces, share the same or need the same relevant functional predictors, have the same biology requirements, and most of the time it's not true. So if you run a model for different subspecies or different species, even from the same genus, I'm not sure if you will be able to have the high quality of the information you need to design some conservation actions for the species. So I didn't mention, but we are very, very rigorous. We are very criterious in selecting all the model parameters, and we only model this species on a fine spatial resolution, and so we are very careful selecting the functional relevant predictors for that species. So and this is something that assures the high quality model results we have by the end. So for conservation, for assuring the high quality of the final results, for guiding decisions in conservation, I wouldn't recommend to run a model for a group of the species as one unit. So I'm not sure.
So that you'd say the trade-off would be too great in terms of the loss of quality of the results.
Yeah.
For the fineness of the detail. Yeah. Okay.
Sure,
Thank you for that. And Tao is asking about how should we deal with the possible over or underestimation, and so do you have it? Do you come across those situations when, well, obviously you can do, where, and I guess this relates to the quality of the data that goes in as to whether or not you kind of over or underestimate. Do you find tendencies in any one direction or another when you're doing these sorts of modeling, or does it vary?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, we are very worried, very careful about with omission. So the error type 2, because it's considered more how can I say more I lost the word, but more worried errors. So more serious errors. So we can't accept a model that omit areas where the species is present. So I always work very hard to have a better model if I have models with omission areas or omitting areas where the species is supposed to occur. The other error, so the over prediction or the commission, sometimes we are not so worried because when we select the predictors, we select predictors that explain the species presence. What we are modeling is the species presence. So we are not modeling, or sometimes we are not including in our model predictors that explain the species absence. As some threats, for example. So what happens is, and this happens very frequently for most of the terrestrial mammals, for example, species that are hunted or poached, sorry. So sometimes the model predict an area as environmental suitable for that species, but the specialists know that the species is not there because the species is poached or because the high hunting pressure of that area. So the model didn't result in any error. So, but it's considered, of course, an overprediction. And what the specialist does is trying to explain this, or sometimes we omit this area from the model when the specialists are sure that the species is not there, and that the model just predicted because the limiting factors were not included in the modeling. What I try to do is of course include some limiting factors as the deforestation rate, for example. I did this many times for many models, but hunting pressure is something that is impossible to include in modeling in SDM. So we try to deal with these both errors and avoiding, definitely avoiding the omission error, and sometimes dealing with the overprediction and the commission by explanation or by manually removing these areas from the model to not bring some uncertainty in terms of the model estimates or area, for example, estimates.
Could you, Katia, along those lines, could you then, if you have experts who say, look, there's no way there's anything in this area here, and actually, in general, anything that's too close to a settlement, a human settlement of some kind, within 10 miles or whatever it might be, it's unlikely they're going to be there. Are you able to kind of then rerun models where you can add in these additional sort of limiting factors that then will sort of extrapolate out across these other sites. So you can add, you don't have to just do one site at a time. You could add in another characteristic as sort of nothing within this sort of range around a village.
Yeah. Yes, definitely, James.
Yeah.
Actually, for the check and packery, we did this. We ran many models, more than 20 models, and the models didn't predict correctly the distribution and suitability for the species in the Chaco. And then one participant in the plenary tried to explain me why not. And when he mentioned that the deforestation rate in the last 5 years was something extremely strong and very high. So I said, oh, maybe this is the reason. So then we were able to get this data, and I incorporated the deforestation rate. I updated the land cover map that was available by that time. And then I ran the model again. And then I ran one more model, so the last model, and then I showed it to them. All of them said, yes, this is what we expected. So when I included this limiting factor, the deforestation rate, the model improved a lot. And I only was able to do this because someone just helped me with the information and during the model validation. So
great stuff. Milena's asking, do the habitat suitability models presented, do they incorporate scale of effect analysis?
Yeah, no, yes, yeah, no, oops, sorry. No, we don't incorporate the scale effect analysis in the SDMs. What I try to do, of course, is trying to select the proper spatial resolution, so to have good models by the end, but we never test the scale effect. It's not common, actually, so not for this modeling.
Great,
thank you for your question.
And Ariana is asking, thanks for providing real life examples. Question is, how many variables are needed to have an acceptable confidence level? I don't know whether, is that a bit like how long is a piece of string, or can you actually determine, is there a kind of a number that comes to mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. And actually, there is not a recipe, so there is not a magic number, but it's impossible to run the species distribution model with so few predictors. So at least 5. This is a magic number that everybody just advises us to consider at a minimum of 5 predictors. And of course, it's not good if you have so many 30, 40 predictors. So by the obvious reasons. So what I try to do is just to look to the species biology, species requirement, to the threats for the species in that geographic space. And then with the species experts, with the stakeholders, we try to select the functionally or the meaningfully predictors that make sense for the species, explaining or limiting the species distribution. So sometimes it's about something between 10 and 20 predictors, but we never use all the predictors in our model. We need to test the correlation of the predictors, and we only retain the predictors not correlated. So if you start with 10 to 20, it's possible that you finish with 6 or 8 predictors or 10, and it's good, it's enough. If you can catch the best predictor to predict the species distribution, then you probably will have a good model by the end.
Excellent. And you're using the people in the room to validate the model, aren't you? You're saying, does this make sense to you based on your on-the-ground understanding of the situation?
Yes. All data, all the information are raised on the ground by them. Yeah.
Cool. So I can see we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to shoot through some more questions from Gino. For some species and at some scales, human activity is an important factor shaping spatial distribution. How far have we advanced in understanding human impacts in habitats? And it mentions about agricultural practices as an example may foster permeability in the matrices and be important input for species conservation plans. So that human, the human use of the landscape, how much, to what extent that can be factored in. I imagine if you have data on it, you can put it in, can't you? Or you can find a way of incorporating it. Would that be the case?
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's very interesting because this is something that I didn't mention, but when we model, when we make the use of this modeling tool, we never consider to model the ecological niche of the species, because we assume that the distribution area of the species at the present moment and in the future moment has been altered, has been modified by human activities, by anthropogenic variables. So our start pointing is to model focusing in the species distribution models. So there are huge discussion in the literature about when you are modeling the species distribution and when you are modeling the species niche. So for conservation, we never considered the ecological niche. So we focus on species distribution. And if we focus on species distribution, it's inevitable that you include human and anthropogenic landscapes in your model, especially because these variables restrict, alter, fragment the suitable area for the species. So, of course, I include variables such as bioclimatic ones, the topographic ones, but I also include variables that comes from the land cover. For example, deforestation rate, proportion of forest, proportion of agricultural matrices when it matters for the species distribution, and many others, human footprint, luminosity, so landscape diversity. So there are lots of variables that we include in our model just to improve the model result, to be very close to what we expect or to what we have by the end for the species. So, for example, for that critically endangered bird that remains only 27 individuals, we selected the variables and included the variable as habitat loss in the model because, of course, the species doesn't occur in the whole potential historical area as in the past. So the species lost habitat. So we need to include this variable to improve our model results. So it's a good question. And there are lots of anthropogenic variables that is not available for download and in the internet. So what I do is try to sometimes to generate some proxies. For example, we generate accessibility variable as proxy of human hunting pressure. So we did this in that paper modeling jaguar in the Atlantic forest, and yeah. So sometimes we need to build your predictor because it's not available for public use most of the time.
So Gabby, I'm just trying to combine probably rather badly Gabby and Andrea's question, but they're asking about what happens if you've got information on a species within a small area for example, in Andrea's case, she's got information on wildcats within protected areas, but they're relatively, you know, they're isolated areas where they've got data and they've got this vast area of habitat around. And you know, is it worth doing SDM when you've only got small pockets, spatially pockets of info?
James, I lost. Sorry,
try and
James?
extrapolate out, or assume then sort of out, or
can you, James, I lost you.
No?
Your yeah. So probably the internet. So it's just a very cut. So I didn't hear. I didn't hear you.
Sure.
So can you repeat, please?
Can you hear me? Yeah. So if you have information, no, you don't. You can't hear me.
Yeah. Now I can.
But you can hear me. Okay. So if you have information on a species distribution, but only from a small area, for example, within a protected area where research might be carried on,
yeah.
Can you? But you're concerned about the wider area. Can you use SDM usefully to understand what might be going on more widely, or is it dangerous to extrapolate out?
Yeah,
I presume if it's very different, that area. Yeah.
Now I got it. Thank you for your question. And no, I think it's dangerous if you do this, because if you have information that comes only from a small area and you try to predict the species distribution over a wider area, so your model results could be very tendentious, very biased by the environmental information that the species presence bring to the algorithm from only one site, one area. So you need to have the presence points spread out in the geographic space you decide to model. So because these points should bring the diverse information about the environment predictors from the area. So if you only have points from a small area, probably you can't model and can't use this for a wider. But you can design an area, a smaller area to have your model or geographic space that brings the similar environmental information to the area from where you have the presence points. And then if you do this, then you are able to use the tool to predict the species distribution over this new entire area. So yeah.
Fantastic, Kat.
I hope you.
That's wonderful. And there are other questions, and what I think I'll do is, if you don't mind, I will copy those questions and I'll put them in an email to you, and then maybe we'll circulate is that all right? And circulate the answers to everybody.
Yes, for sure. And I'm glad I can. I will answer them for sure.
And fantastic, Katia. That was a wonderful presentation, really engaging, very insightful, very valuable. Thank you so much for doing it and for your answers as well. And I think the chat in the chat is a test to that as well. For everybody that's on the call just now, next month's webinar, which will be, I think it's the 28th of April, but I will get back to you. If you're on our mailing list, then you'll get the details. And if you're not on it, then you can email me and I can tell you where to get yourself on it. But it's looking at evaluating project effectiveness and its use of a model to understand how projects function and how we can, what aspects of them we can look at to enable them to work better. So we're looking at planning from the other side, looking backwards on how projects were planned and implemented through the lens of something called the Conservation Excellence Model by Dr. Simon Black from the University of Kent. But say we'll put more details on the website and get yourself signed up to our regular updates so that you can be know when that's been released. But Katia, thank you again so much for that wonderful presentation. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We will
Thank you,
put
Jane.
this as
Thank you all. Thank you so much. I'm so glad. Thank you.
And it was great. And there was sorry.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And there was a question about the recording, and we'll put it on the website. So if you then have students who you want to give access to, then you can be able to get it from there, and we'll get that up later on this week. So, all right, I'll say goodbye for now. And Katia, thank
you. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you, Jane.
you again.